20 seconds. That is all the time it took for the USS Juneau, a state-of-the-art American cruiser, to vanish into a pillar of fire and bone-crushing pressure. The explosion was so absolute that witnesses on nearby ships didn't even stop to look for survivors. They were certain that no soul could have outlived that cataclysm. They were wrong. But for the hundreds of sailors who drifted into the Black Pacific night, including the legendary 5 Sullivan brothers, the nightmare was only beginning. For 76 years, this shattered hull remained a ghost of the Solomon Islands, hidden 13,800 feet down in a realm of eternal darkness. Today we go beyond the history books. We are descending into the abyss to witness the grave of brothers as it stands now. From the eerie Battle E, still visible on her guns, to the twisted steel that tells the story of her final violent moments, we are uncovering the truth of what lies beneath. This isn't just a shipwreck. It is a sacred site where time stopped in 1942. This is the silent vigil of the USS Juneau. To understand why the USS Juneau matters, why her twisted remains on the seafloor carry such a heavy weight of reverence, you have to understand the 5 faces that became her soul. While the Juneau was a marvel of mid-century engineering, her true legacy was forged in the blood of a single family from Waterloo, Iowa, George Francis Joseph Madison and Albert Sullivan. 5 brothers who, in the wake of the attack on Pearl Harbor, walked into a recruitment office with a singular, non-negotiable demand: we stick together. In an era where the Navy preferred to scatter siblings across different fleets to prevent a total family tragedy, the Sullivans' persistence eventually won over the bureaucracy. They were assigned to the Juneau, a decision that would eventually change the laws of the United States military forever. When the torpedo from the Japanese submarine I-26 tore into the Juneau's hull on November 13, 1942, the world didn't just lose a ship. It witnessed the near extinction of a family line. The catastrophe was so sudden and the explosion so violent that the other ships in the task force believed the Juneau had simply vaporized. No one stopped to look. No one lowered a boat. They steamed away, leaving the debris and any potential survivors behind in a sea of oil and sharks. The tragedy of the Sullivans isn't just that they died. It's how they died. Contrary to the initial reports that the brothers perished instantly in the blast, survivors' accounts paint a much more harrowing picture. George, the eldest, reportedly survived the sinking and spent several agonizing days in the water, drifting in the vast, indifferent Pacific, calling out the names of his brothers into the darkness. One by one, those voices went silent. By the time rescue finally arrived, 8 days later, only 10 men were pulled from the water. None of them were Sullivans. Back in Iowa, the silence was deafening. For weeks, the Sullivan parents, Tom and Aletta, heard nothing but rumors. Then, on a cold January morning in 1943, a black Buick pulled up to their modest home. 3 men in uniform stepped out, a lieutenant commander, a doctor, and a chief petty officer. When Tom Sullivan saw them at the door, he didn't ask, "Is there news?" He looked at the officer and said, "Which one?" The officer's response remains one of the most heartbreaking sentences in American military history. "I'm sorry, all 5. The grief of the Sullivans became the grief of a nation." Their sacrifice was so monumental that it led to the immediate implementation of the sole survivor policy, designed to protect families from being decimated by the loss of all their children in combat. To this day, the U.S. military ensures that no family has to bear the burden that the Sullivans did. Their names were immortalized on the hulls of 2 destroyers, including the USS the Sullivans, which still stands today as a museum ship, a floating testament to the price of freedom. But while the world built monuments and named ships after them, the brothers themselves remained where they fell. They are still there 13,800 feet down, encased in the steel of the Juneau. As we look at the footage of the wreck, we aren't just looking at archaeology. We are looking at a sanctuary. Each piece of debris, each gun mount we identify is a headstone in an underwater cathedral. The Juneau didn't just take 687 men to the bottom. She took a piece of the American heart with her. This is why we return to the wreck. Not to celebrate the machine, but to honor the men who, until their very last breath, refused to be parted. The Juneau is, and will always be, the grave of brothers. For 76 years, the USS Juneau was more than just a missing shipwreck. She was a phantom of the Pacific. While many of the other steel casualties of the brutal Guadalcanal campaign were located, mapped, and photographed, the Juneau remained stubbornly elusive. The waters of the Solomon Islands had earned the grim nickname Iron Bottom Sound for a reason. The seafloor there is a chaotic underwater junkyard of shattered cruisers, twisted destroyers, and downed aircraft from both sides of the conflict. But even in this crowded graveyard of heroes, the Juneau had vanished without a trace, as if the ocean itself was trying to hide the scale of the tragedy that occurred there. The primary reason for her long silence was the sheer terrifying violence of her end. Most ships die slowly, providing a trail of debris, oil, and a final verified position. The Juneau had no such luxury. When that second torpedo from the ICAT-26 struck her weakened hull near the magazine, she didn't just sink. She disintegrated in a pillar of fire that rose 1,000 feet into the air. In the chaos of 1942, with the heat of battle all around, navigational records were unreliable at best. The ship's final resting place was essentially a guess written in a water, a set of coordinates lost in the smoke of a catastrophic explosion. By the 1990s, as technology improved, underwater archaeologists began surveying the area with increasingly sophisticated sonar. They found the Quincy the Vincennes and the Astoria, the 3 sisters, lost in the Battle of Savo Island. They found the massive Japanese battleship Kirishima. But the Juneau stayed in the dark. It wasn't until a billionaire with a passion for naval history and a world-class team of explorers turned their eyes toward the abyss that the ghost was finally summoned from her long sleep. Paul Allen's research vessel, the RV Petrel, was a ship of the future searching for the secrets of the past. Her crew didn't just have maps. They had state-of-the-art autonomous underwater vehicles capable of descending to depths that would crush a modern nuclear submarine like a tin can. To find the Juneau, they had to scan a world of eternal midnight 13,800 feet beneath the surface. To put that in perspective, the Juneau rests deeper than the RMS Titanic. At that depth, the pressure is over 6,000 pounds per square inch. It is a place where light never reaches, where the temperature hovers just above freezing, and where time is measured in centuries. The search was a grueling test of patience and digital precision. Day after day, the crew and the Petrel watched the blue-tinted monitors as side-scan sonar painted a grainy monochrome picture of the seabed miles below. Most of it was an endless desert of mud and volcanic rock. But the team knew that somewhere down there, a 541-foot cruiser was waiting. They were looking for the signature of man-made steel, hard, straight lines that did not belong in the natural contours of the ocean floor. Then, on March 17, 2018, St. Patrick's Day, the darkness finally gave up its secret. It started as a jagged, unnatural anomaly on the sonar screen. It wasn't a solid hull, but a massive field of debris scattered across the silt for hundreds of yards. As the remotely operated vehicle began its 3-hour descent to verify the target, the atmosphere in the Petrel's control room was thick with a heavy, respectful anticipation. When the high-powered LED lights finally cut through the black silt of the abyss, the first thing they saw wasn't a proud ship, but a monument of absolute destruction. The cameras panned over massive sections of steel torn and curled as if they were made of paper. This wasn't a ship that had settled gracefully to the bottom. This was a ship that had been shredded. But then, through the gloom, a distinctive shape emerged. A gun mount, a railing, and finally, the stern of the ship, where the letters JUNEAU remained stubbornly visible through the rust. The irony was lost on no one. Finding the Sullivan brothers' ship on St. Patrick's Day felt less like a coincidence and more like a homecoming for the Irish-American family. The ghost had been found, but as the lights illuminated the twisted remains, the team realized that the search was over. But the autopsy of a tragedy was just beginning. When the high-definition cameras of the ROV finally settled on the main wreckage of the USS Juneau, the images they sent back were not of a ship that had merely sunk. They were images of a ship that had been fundamentally unmade. To look at the Juneau today is to look at the anatomy of a cataclysm. The most striking and perhaps most haunting feature of the wreck is the sheer violence recorded in its steel. On the port side, the hull has been peeled back and curled outward as if a giant hand had ripped open a tin can from the inside. This is the physical signature of the second torpedo hit from the Japanese submarine I-26. Because the torpedo struck almost exactly where a previous hit had already weakened the structure, and because it hit near the ship's magazines, the resulting internal explosion didn't just breach the hull, it detonated it. The force was so immense that it didn't just sink the Juneau. It shattered her spine, sending her to the bottom in 2 distinct mutilated pieces. One of the most bizarre and tragic sights on the sea floor is the relationship between the bow and the stern. In a strange twist of physics, the stern of the ship landed almost directly on top of the crumpled bow, resting nearly 2,000 feet away from the main section of the hull. It is here, amidst a tangle of mangled masts and ruined superstructure, that the nameplate was found. The letters Juneau are still legible, appearing through the silt like a voice calling out from the past. Near this mess of steel lies the ship's anchor, still locked firmly in its mounting point, a symbol of a vessel that was ready to fight even as it was being torn apart. Moving to the main section of the hull, there is a jarring contrast. While the ends of the ship are a chaotic debris field, the center section sits remarkably upright on the seabed, as if it is still trying to maintain its dignity. Here, the offensive weaponry of the Juneau remains in a state of eerie preservation. The 5-inch gun mounts the primary teeth of the cruiser are still mostly intact. On one of these mounts, the ROV captured a detail that brought the human element of the crew back to life, a faded painted letter E. This was the Battle Efficiency Award, a badge of honor earned by the crew for their exceptional performance. To see it still clinging to the steel after 8 decades in the abyss is a powerful reminder that these were not just machines. They were manned by some of the finest sailors in the U.S. Navy. The Juneau also reveals a rarity in American cruiser wrecks: her torpedo tubes. By 1942, most U.S. cruisers had removed their torpedoes to make room for more anti-aircraft guns, but the Juneau was of the Atlanta class designed to carry these deadly fish. On the port side, a collapsed crane lies across the tubes, but on the starboard side, 3 of the 4 tubes remain fixed in their racks, with the torpedoes still visible inside. They are frozen in a state of perpetual readiness. Weapons of a war that ended long ago. Perhaps the most surreal discovery in the debris field is the ship's rudder. In most shipwrecks, the rudder is buried deep in the mud or still attached to the stern. But the Juneau's rudder was torn clean off during the sinking and now rests alone, inverted in the silt some distance from the hull. It is a rare, almost unique sight in underwater archaeology, a silent witness to the moment the ship lost all control and surrendered to the deep. As the ROV lights pan across the Chicago piano, anti-aircraft mounts, and the twisted funnels, the reality of the sight becomes unavoidable. This isn't just a collection of artifacts. It is a crime scene where 687 men were lost in an instant. The preservation offered by the 13,800 feet of water has kept the Juneau's story from fading, turning her shattered remains into a permanent submerged monument to the violence of the Pacific War and the brothers who rest within her. While the catastrophic damage to the USS Juneau was expected, the deep sea survey by the RV Petrel revealed a series of surprises that defied the typical expectations of a shipwreck. To explore the Juneau is to encounter a paradox, a ship that was utterly destroyed, yet in some specific haunting ways remains perfectly preserved. The abyss at 13,800 feet acts as a high-pressure vault, and what the Petrel's cameras found inside that vault was nothing short of miraculous. The first surprise lies in the comparison with her sister ship, the USS Atlanta. While the Atlanta rests in relatively shallow waters, shallow enough for highly skilled technical divers to reach her, the Juneau is buried in the crushing dark of 4,200 meters. This extreme depth has served as her greatest protector. Unlike shallower wrecks that are subject to the erosive power of strong currents, light-loving marine life, and the illegal activities of scavengers, the Juneau has been left in a state of suspended animation. The preservation of her American warship steel is so pristine that in certain areas it looks as though she settled onto the silt only yesterday. As the ROV glided past the 5-inch gun mounts, the team was stunned by the level of detail still visible. On the port side mounts, the cameras were able to peer directly into the muzzles of the guns. There, they could clearly see the rifling, the spiral grooves inside the barrel designed to spin the shell for accuracy. Even more staggering were the gun periscopes. On several mounts, the optical systems were almost entirely intact, missing only their protective covers. These eyes of the ship, which once tracked Japanese bombers through the smoke of Guadalcanal, still stare out into the blackness, their glass surfaces reflecting the artificial lights of the 21st century robot. Then there is the matter of the paint. Most wrecks at this depth are reduced to a monochromatic orange-brown of rust and silt. However, the Juneau still holds on to her colors. On the Mark 37 fire control director, the brain that aimed the ship's heavy guns, large patches of original blue paint are still vividly visible. To see a splash of World War II-era navy blue at the bottom of the Pacific is a jarring experience. It breaks the illusion that this is just a piece of history. It reminds you that this was a vibrant working machine. Nearby, a hatch on the back of a gun mount hangs wide open, frozen in the exact position it was thrown by the force of the internal explosion. It is a literal open door, Into the tragedy, a moment of violent chaos captured in a frame of eternal stillness. The surprises continued with the ship's torpedo tubes. As a brand-new Atlanta-class cruiser, the Juneau was an outlier, carrying torpedoes that most other cruisers had long since discarded to make room for more anti-aircraft guns. The ROV captured images of the torpedo stop mechanisms and instruction plaques. Even after 76 years of saltwater immersion, the writing on these plaques was still legible, providing a hauntingly mundane look at the daily operations of a crew that was about to face the unthinkable. Inside the tubes, the fish remained tucked away, their metal skins gleaming under the LED lights, unfired and lethal even in death. But perhaps the most technically surprising find was the rudder. In the world of underwater archaeology, rudders are usually predictable. They are either still attached to the stern or buried deep beneath the mud under the weight of the hull. On the Juneau, the rudder was found completely detached, lying entirely alone in the debris field. And most strangely of all, it was inverted. To see a piece of machinery as massive and integral as a cruiser's rudder lying upside down hundreds of yards from the ship it once steered is a testament to the unnatural swirling forces that took hold of the Juneau as she was pulled into the deep. These surprises do more than provide data for historians. They provide a bridge to the past. They transform a wreck into a witness. Every intact periscope, every patch of blue paint, and every legible instruction plaque serves as a direct link to the 687 men who called this steel sanctuary home. They remind us that while the Juneau was broken by war, she was not erased by time. The lights of the ROV begin their slow, deliberate ascent, leaving the shattered remains of the USS Juneau to the eternal silence of the abyss. As the blue paint and twisted steel fade back into the crushing darkness of the Pacific, we are left with more than just a collection of haunting images. We are left with a profound sense of closure. For over 7 decades, the families of the 687 men lost fathers, sons, cousins, and those 5 inseparable brothers had no place to lay their grief. There was no cemetery to visit, no headstone to touch. There was only the vast, indifferent expanse of the Solomon Sea. But the discovery by the RV Petrel changed everything. It transformed a ghost story into a physical reality. It proved that even in the deepest, darkest corners of our world, those who sacrificed everything are never truly forgotten. They are merely waiting to be found. The Juneau is a rare kind of monument. It is a sanctuary where time has been forced to stand still. While the world above has changed, while empires have fallen and new technologies have reshaped our lives, the Juneau remains exactly as she was in those frantic final moments of 1942. The Battle-E still honors the crew's excellence. The periscopes still search the darkness. And the Sullivan brothers, who refused to be parted in life, remain together in death, encased in the steel they called home. The mission to find these wrecks, led by men like Paul Allen and the dedicated crews of the Vulcan and Petrel expeditions, is about more than archaeology. It is about a debt of honor. It is about ensuring that the names of the men who went down with their ships don't just become footnotes in a dusty textbook. By documenting these sites, we preserve the visceral reality of their courage and the staggering cost of the peace we enjoy today. We bring them home in a way by bringing their stories back to the light. As we look one last time at the silhouette of the grave of brothers, we are reminded that history is not just about maps and dates. It is about the human heart, its loyalty, its bravery, and its devastating losses. The USS Juneau will likely never be visited by human eyes again, but she no longer rests in anonymity. She is mapped, she is remembered, she is honored. Thank you for joining us on this descent into one of the most sacred sites of the Pacific War. If you believe that these stories of sacrifice and discovery deserve to be told, and that the memory of ships like the Juneau should never fade, please consider subscribing to the channel. By liking and sharing this video, you help us keep the flame of history alive for future generations. The depths may be silent, but through our remembrance, their voices can still be heard. Until next time we leave the USS Juneau to her silent vigil. Rest in peace, sailors. You are found.